Now, live from the Matt Black Kia Studios.
Oh, what a move!
Here's Josh Hennig.
A Tuesday edition of Game Night here on 97.3 ESPN, live from the Matt Black Kia Studio, also known as the Icebox, here at 97.3 ESPN. I am Josh Hennig, as you see me in virtual living color on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We are also live on 97.3 ESPN FM, 97.3 ESPN.com, and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. We got a lot to get to and a little bit of time to get to it. We got Emory Hunt, NFL analyst, as well as college football analyst. You've seen him over on CBS Sports HQ. He'll join us coming up at 6:15. He'll get deeper into the prospects themselves. Yesterday, we talked with Eric Edholm about the overall perspective on how the teams did with their draft picks. Well, today with Emory, we are going to flip the script. We're going to go now to, all right, how do these guys do, the individual players coming into the NFL? So we'll get to that with him coming up in just a little bit, roughly about 14 minutes from now. Plus, the second to last Flyers game of the season at home is tonight. You can hear the action right here on 97.3 ESPN. One of only two more home games for the Flyers, and their season of disappointment is done. What is to say of the Philadelphia Flyers? We'll get to that with Kevin Durso coming up at 6:40 tonight. Dave Scott, the head honcho of the organization, spoke recently, and he had some interesting things to say. And I'm interested to hear what Kevin Durso thinks about the things that he had to say. And of course, you can always interact with the show as always. If you're listening on 97.3 ESPN FM or the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, the text board is open at 609-403-0973. If you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, you can drop a comment right below on the stream right here. Get on the conversation as you watch the show. Just follow 97.3 ESPN. One of my big takeaways from the last 2 days I've noticed is that a lot of people are still digesting the reality that the Eagles went out there and they didn't draft for need. And I know that's not a real exciting thing to explain, but hear me out for a moment. Drafting for need gets teams in trouble at times. You need to draft best player available to make sure that what you get is the right player for your organization. And the more I've been thinking about this, the more I'm starting to come around on, listen, before the draft, I was not a big believer in best player available, because I always felt that the best player available can blind you from doing what's necessary. But I go back to what they talked about weeks ago at that press conference, because as I've been saying for weeks, when Howie Roseman, Andy Weidel, and Nick Sirianni spoke to the media weeks ago, they were very, very upfront about certain things when it came to the draft. And remember when Howie Roseman was asked about the report saying that they got away from their draft board last year? When he was asked that question, remember this was his answer. He didn't deny the report.
Yeah, we learned a lot about the process last year. Obviously unique the first time that we're doing all of these on Zoom, and there are a lot of lessons learned. And I think where we are right now is just excited about the teamwork that we had throughout this process with the coaches, with the scouts, with our front office, and move for there to make sure that we have a tremendous draft this year. You know, the book hasn't been written on last year's draft either. So excited for those guys to get with Coach and his staff.
Notice how he said we learned a lot from last year. You don't think that part of what they learned about last year was maybe their strategy was, wrong? Speaking of strategy, Howie Roseman also spoke about draft strategy just a couple weeks ago.
If you move back, it's because you feel like you have a bunch of guys that are the same value and you'd be really happy getting one and getting the extra volume from that pick. If you move up, it's because your board kind of drops off at that point. And if you select, it's because you feel like it's the last player in that sort of range. And so when we discussed this, I think those were really the things we were discussing about moving back. And when you're moving back early, you have to feel like you're getting a premium. And we felt like we were getting a premium to do that.
Philadelphia Eagles is, if you're Howie Roseman, he tells you if you trade up and you trade back, these are scenarios why you do it. Then it makes so much more sense why they did what they did. I don't think in any form or fashion it's a coincidence that the Eagles were very specific in that press conference. And now, as we look at the draft picks and we review them, we're going to be reviewing them for days and weeks and everything now. We are going to have to, let the situation play out, but with the understanding that the Eagles changed their strategy, they changed their process, and now moving forward, they're going to do things differently. And I think that it is something for all of us to have to learn to accept. It's part of the nature of this organization. Whether you like it or not, they're not going to reach for players anymore. They've made the mistake before. They're not going to make the mistake again. And if Howie Roseman is serious about keeping his job, he is not going to reach for a corner who may not be able to play outside corner when you already have what seems to be 20 inside corners. Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get deeper into the draft picks themselves with Emory Hunt coming up in about 8 minutes from now here on 97.3 ESPN FM. The other thing I wanted to get to, and this is not specifically Eagles related, but it's a story that happened today in the NFL that I think that we need to talk about. And that is what happened in Denver today. So for those who don't know, Juwan James, he is a offensive tackle for the Denver Broncos. He injured himself today, and he looks like torn his Achilles tendon, and his season's over before it ever started. And that's because partly players are not in the facilities. Remember that whole situation about a month ago where the players' union started coming out and said, we don't need to be in the building. We don't want the wear and tear. We're worried about health and safety protocols and all of this. Well, Juwan James is now the first victim of the players' union using the players as their health and safety, basically as proxies that not have to show up the training camps. And now Juwan James could potentially lose $10 million at minimum, up to $20 million according to Adam Schefter, for missing time. This is a serious situation because if you are an Eagles fan, or you're a Giants fan, or you're a Cowboys fan, or a Washington fan, or a Steelers fan, whatever team you are, listening to the sound of my voice or watching me on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, this could happen to you, your players. There are now players out there who could lose out on money because of injuries, things that are out of their control, and teams could potentially take money off of their plate because they didn't come into the building and work out. I just hope at the end of the day, the players' union steps up and takes care of these guys, because I'd hate to see anybody lose out on money and not be able to get their health taken care of because they were given bad advice by the players' union. So be careful when you hear about injuries coming up over the next several weeks, if it's in the building or outside the building. A huge difference in terms of these players' futures financially and medically. for these NFL players. It's a very bad predicament. I really feel bad for Juwan James of the Broncos. He is really the victim of circumstance. It's really a sad situation that the NFL is now be stuck in because the players union forced this to happen. All right, we're going to get into the draft prospects of the Eagles and the NFC East coming up next with Emory Hunt, football game plan, CBS Sports HQs, where you see him as well, right here on Game Night with yours truly, Josh Hennig, on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. It's free thanks to First Bank of Seattle City. And we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, where you can watch the show. Just follow 97.3 ESPN.
It's Philadelphia Flyers hockey. Tonight, coverage begins at 7 p.m. on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app with Tim Saunders and Steve Coates calling all the play-by-play action.
The Devils puck, the Flyers score!
The Flyers host the Pittsburgh Penguins. It's Philadelphia Flyers hockey on the radio home of the Flyers in South Jersey. 97.3 ESPN. And listen live on the free mobile app.
You have the choice, whether it's going out for dinner or ordering takeout at a local restaurant or buying that new outfit from a local boutique. Those choices help to put money back into your community. And Town Square Media South Jersey puts a spotlight on local businesses.
Ambient Comfort Heating and Cooling Professionals. AmbientComfortNJ.com.
Filling Marble and Tile Outlet, Philadelphia Avenue and Route 30 in Egg Harbor City. FillingMarble.com.
Dennisville Fence, serving you since 1952. Be the envy of your neighborhood.
East Coast Roofing, Siding, and Windows services all of South Jersey. If you call, they'll show up. Call East Coast today at 609-646-1444. Online at eastcoastroofing.com.
Comfort Now by Bob McAllister. Improve the comfort in your home. Call 609-400-1005 and ask about discounts and rebate incentives. Visit iwantcomfortnow.com.
Thank you for supporting your local businesses. From Town Square Media, South Jersey.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Text board is open as always. We'll get to your comments a little bit later in the show. 609-403-0973. We're also live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, where you can watch the show. And joining us right now on the Boardwalk on the hotline to get more into who are these players who were drafted by your Philadelphia Eagles, as well as other teams around the NFL. He is the one and only Emory Hunt. He is the czar of the playbook at FBall Game Plan on Twitter. And as all guests, he appears on the Boardwalk on the hotline. Emory, good to see you. How you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Josh. I appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you jumping on. You know, you're someone who studies these players as much, if not more, than almost anybody I can think of. And to me, when I think about who these players are, I want to ask you, and I want to start with the guy at the top for the Eagles. There's a lot of perspective out there that the people feel that the Philadelphia Eagles, when they traded up to Devonta Smith, that was more than just them saying we need a wide receiver. They were saying, a lot of people believe in this draft, we are going with best player available. So with that in mind, what does that say to you about how the Philadelphia Eagles view Devonta Smith?
Well, they view him as their number one option in the passing game, to help their franchise quarterback, Jalen Hurts, do what he does best and find targets, at the intermediate level and deep down the field. So for them going up to get Devonta Smith, it not only helps them out in the passing game, but it also took away a potential target for the New York Giants, who I feel as though would have strongly selected Smith if had he been there when they were on the clock, which is why they jumped ahead of Dallas to take their guy, because the Cowboys looked at it, well, hey, the guy that we probably were targeting went just a pick before us to Denver, so we could take a step back and gather more picks and take a different guy, our second defensive player on the board. So therefore, it allowed the Eagles to jump ahead of the Giants and take the Heisman Trophy winner.
Now, people know that he's the Heisman Trophy winner, but what else can you tell people about what Devonta Smith brings to an Eagles offense that will be different this year because it's Nick Sirianni's offense and not longer Doug Peterson's?
Well, he gives them the home run threat. They have a home run threat type of player at quarterback in Jalen Hurts. They have now one out on the perimeter in Devonta Smith. And because of Jalen Hurts' ability to run, you buy a byproduct of that is having a home run hitter in the backfield in Miles Sanders. So they're going to be explosive at all three levels. And when you factor in, Dallas Goedert, growing into the role as a move tight end, as a flex tight end, and if they're able to keep Zach Ertz, it allows him now to be so dynamic on offense. Jalen Reagor should improve in the second year. So having Devonta Smith gives you someone that you have to pay attention to. And so you just can't really double up on one guy and take one guy out of the game. You have to slide coverage toward Devonta Smith, or he could just beat you straight off the line, or he's a good catch and run guy as well. So it just opens up the offense as a whole.
You mentioned about Jalen Hurts. Do you read anything into the idea that the Eagles were looking to maybe also not just best player available, but maybe also say, hey, Devonta Smith, Jalen Hurts, they play together. Dickerson and Hurts, they play together. There's a familiarity there. Maybe we could have these guys grow with each other just like they were at Alabama a little bit.
It just so happens that those were also some of the best players at the position. So it just worked out that way. So I don't think they went into the situation trying to find all of his teammates at either Alabama or Oklahoma. It just so happened that those two guys were amongst the top tier at the position, and it just so happens that they fell. And it just so happens that they were also teammates of Jalen Hurts. So it worked out for them. They got really good players, to help out that offense. And we should see an offense look a lot better, much more cohesive and much more consistent this season under Nick Sirianni.
Emory Hunt joining us here on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN at FBall Game Plan on Twitter. Also, Football Game Plan on YouTube for all of your college football, NFL draft, and all kinds of football analysis over there on the YouTube channel. Emory, I touched on Dickerson for a minute. A lot of people have questions about him. He's had multiple injuries. Can he avoid those injuries? I know some people bring up, Anthony Munoz and Orlando Pace, that they had injuries in college and that they were fine as NFL players. I'm not saying he's going to be Hall of Famers, but, is there a possibility that Dickerson may have already gotten the injuries out of the way, or do you have concerns about his durability in the NFL?
I do have concerns because the last time we saw Landon Dickerson, he was getting injured on the field. He's been injured every year in college outside of maybe 1 or 2 years sandwiched in between. But for the most part, every year he has dealt with an injury. And that's concerning because that's something that just seems to, follow you no matter where you go. And that's why it's always tough to see guys that are so talented that can't stay healthy. It's not no fault of their own. It's just an unfortunate series of events. And when you think about someone like Dickerson, who's played across the offensive line, So he can play any one of the 5 positions, but just has been snake bitten by the injury bug. And that's unfortunate because you want to bank on him. You want to, count on him to be one of those guys. But as soon as you put all your eggs in that basket, something happens and he goes down with an injury. Now you're back to square one. So, yeah, it is a bit of a concern. So I think the Eagles will try to bring him along slowly to see how he's able to progress. And then you can start putting that full faith in him because he's a tremendous talent. If he's 100%, he's one of the best players in the draft, regardless of position.
Let's go deeper into the draft for the Eagles. Tell us about who Milton Williams is and why should they care that the Eagles drafted him?
He's a really good player, versatile, was a defensive end that moved inside to tackle, so it gives you a little bit of flexibility and versatility. He's quick off the ball. He's bringing those defensive end skills inside, so you get someone that can be a little bit of a pressure player for the Eagles. And he may not start, but, at the end of the day, you're drafting guys to help you out and to help you win football games, so he'll be a good part of the rotation that helped that Eagles defense get better than 2021.
Let's stay on the D line. Later in the draft, they took Teron Jackson from Coastal Carolina. I like that pick. I think it's a great value pick in my personal opinion because I got to see a lot of Coastal Carolina out there. Explain to folks, what does Jackson bring to the Eagles potentially depth-wise?
Stylistically, he's very similar to that of Brandon Graham. They're both shorter, stockier guys that can bring it off the edge. And Jackson was the Defensive Player of the Year in the Sun Belt Conference, was an AP All-American as well. So he's very productive. You talk about double-digit sacks, double-digit TFL. So the guy was getting the job done on both ends of defense. I thought that was a very underrated selection by Philadelphia.
Let's go into your wheelhouse. I think the steal of the draft for the Eagles was Gainwell, the running back from Memphis. I think this guy has the potential to be a steal in this draft, not just for the Eagles, but in terms of maybe the entire NFC East, because they get a guy that talented at that point in the draft. It tells me that you found value where other people didn't.
It's interesting to see him fall because you consider all the backs that came out of Memphis. Every one of those guys played well in tandem. So I do think him landing to Philadelphia kind of helps out the run game. While he may not be the most dynamic player or explosive player, he's a very productive player. And running sidecar to Miles Sanders just helps that run game, especially when you factor in a mobile quarterback in Jalen Hurts. So it also proves that he doesn't need volume. Coming from Memphis, you're going to split carries, so you don't need volume to be successful, and that's going to be the role he's going to play here in Philadelphia.
You mentioned about the running back tandem. Also thinking about the head coach situation, Sirianni, we saw what he did with the Chargers. We saw what he was doing with the Colts. They like to use multiple running backs in these different roles. So it seems like in some ways that Sirianni might be trying to replicate some of that success he had in the past here in Philadelphia.
Hey, when it works, you play the hits. And the fact of the matter is that you have guys that can do a lot of different things, and you just try to stockpile the depth chart, with backfield talent. And that's why you have guys that you select. If guys fall and you see a need there, you feel it. And I think they did that with Gainwell.
Emory Hunt joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN, at FBall Game Plan on Twitter, also on YouTube at Football Game Plan. Emory, I want to ask you a little bit about a couple of players who were drafted outside the Eagles. I want to start with 2 quarterbacks. I love where Trey Lance ended up. I think it's the perfect fit for him. I feel like it's the perfect fit for San Francisco. I feel like there were a lot of tea leaves that are pointing people in that direction. I think this could be another, I'm not saying he's Pat Mahomes, but maybe another Pat Mahomes situation where a guy can just sit for a year, really refine his skill and then come and burst on the scene, because I just think that what he brings to the table, what San Francisco will ask him to do, just makes too much sense.
He reminds me a lot of Jordan Love, and that Jordan Love situation, I think, will help him out. The benefit he has now this year is that he'll be able to play in preseason. He'll get a ton of reps in the preseason, which is key because that'll help, bolster his development. But he'll need to sit a year, in my opinion, because you're coming from the FCS, not playing a lot of games, not a lot of starts. The one game you played in this year was kind of okay from a throwing perspective, but from a running perspective, he was outstanding. But you kind of want him to really, get on board with the passing game. That's why the preseason will be critical for him, which is why the fact that we're in a normal type situation should be huge. And I just think that going to a situation where he's not going to be thrust into the starting lineup right away, he can sit back a little bit behind Jimmy Garoppolo. As long as Garoppolo doesn't get injured, or doesn't completely, implode, he's going to have the opportunity to grow, learn the system, get acclimated with what the system is, and work on those finer things of, within his mechanics, and be able to hit the ground running, I believe, hopefully in 2022.
What are your thoughts on Justin Fields landing in Chicago?
I think that's a home run hit for Chicago. They finally land a quarterback that's been outstanding, man. Jim McMahon was talented, but he couldn't stay healthy. Jim Harbaugh had some success, here and there with Chicago. Jay Cutler got them to an NFC title game, but there was always something missing about Cutler that just really didn't ingratiate himself with the fans. But now the entire fan base is going to be behind Justin Fields, and he's super talented. He's my number 2 quarterback in the draft. So I think they got themselves what they've been looking for quite some time.
Is it fair to say that maybe Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy saved their jobs by doing this?
I believe so, because Justin Fields is a great player. They're going to win some games. They're going to win a lot of games. He got to the playoffs 2 out of the 3 years with Mitch Trubisky, and now you upgrade that position, with that defense, with some of the talent coming back in the backfield. Tariq Cohen's going to be healthy. They got talent on the perimeter, and if Tevin Jenkins can be as what he's advertised to be along the offensive line, then you won't have any issues there. So I think the Bears are in much better shape by just adding one player as opposed to what they were last year and the last couple of years. Very talented defense, a lot of good playmakers on offense, but was handicapped by their quarterback play. That won't be the case, even if he's a rookie with Justin Fields.
Jumping back to the NFC, I thought that the picks by Micah Parsons for the Cowboys and then later Jabril Cox for Dallas were 2, really picks that were making statements. They're kind of saying, listen, we are going to change this defense. We are taking this defensive situation seriously.
Yeah, and you look at a guy that's a plug-and-play starter in, Micah Parsons. You wonder, Jabril Cox is a good coverage guy, so he'll be a sub-package player, but he'll start out on special teams. Defensively, they were terrible last year. So if they improve just, I don't want to say significantly, but just decently on defense, along with Dak Prescott coming back, then they should be in the playoffs easily. That team was one game away from the playoffs this year with all that chaos that was going on at quarterback, on defense, and they were still right there at the end with a chance to get into the playoffs. So you get a healthy Dak with all those weapons. You get, some improvement on defense with a playmaker like Parsons and a good coverage guy in Cox. It helps you out. And I think Dallas will be one of the top teams in the NFC, let alone the NFC East.
Did the Giants reach for Kadarius Toney?
I don't think so. He's a guy that could put the ball in the paint. He's outstanding in that regard. And he's going to a great situation with a great coach in Tyke Tolbert, who does a great job in coaching up the wide receivers. And, if they were targeting Devonta Smith and he was gone, you find the next best option. To me, Toney reminds me a lot of Antonio Brown and how he's able to make things happen after the catch. He's going to be a dynamic run after the catch player. He's much more savvy as a route runner than given credit for. And we'll see a lot of that utilized with the Giants. So I don't think it was a reach. He's a tremendous player. There's no downside to stockpiling talented players on your football team.
For the Eagles, they only walked out of this draft with Zach McPherson from Texas Tech. Obviously, it's a big need for the Eagles. What were your perspective on the cornerbacks after the top 4 who were picked? It seems like the teams were kind of saying there was a serious drop-off in their view of the guys who were the top 4 versus the next group of corners.
Well, you thought that all health permitting, Caleb Farley was going to go high. And so, obviously the Eagles probably didn't have as high of thoughts on his medical as other teams, but had one of those corners been there, J.C. Horn or Patrick Surtain, I don't think they would have taken Devonta Smith. I think they would have targeted the cornerback. But, getting a guy like Zach McPherson is excellent. He gives them more competition out there on the corner. I love his athleticism, his ball skills, and he's not afraid to tackle. He's a physical guy. So he fits the mantra of what Philly wants at that position. But I just think that the way the first round fell, the top 10, kind of altered their approach to the draft, which is why they made the move to go up and get Devonta Smith, because I truly believe had one of those corners been there for them at 12, they would have made that move instead of the receiver.
Real quick on McPherson, one more thing, and that is some people are questioning, is he an outside corner or an inside corner? I've heard people say he's very versatile. Is he a guy that can eventually be a starting outside corner, or do you think his future is elsewhere on defense?
if he's versatile, it doesn't matter where, I say he's going to be or somebody else says he's going to be. The versatility yields itself to him being a matchup guy on game day. So whatever the matchup dictates, sometimes you may have to play inside primarily against a certain receiver. Sometimes the matchup dictates you got to go outside, and he can do both. So that's a good thing for that secondary.
Emory, one more for you. Appreciate you always jumping on here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN at FBall Game Plan on Twitter, Football Game Plan on YouTube. One of my favorite landing spots when Rashad Bateman landed with Baltimore. I feel like that's a home run for Baltimore because I saw way too many games where Bateman was making catches he was not supposed to be making. And I feel like he might be a perfect fit for exactly what Baltimore needs on that offense.
I think he's more of a possession guy than anything. I love his ability to make catches, like you said. Has very good hands. I don't think he's as explosive or dynamic. So I see him more as a possession receiver, kind of like what they also drafted in Tylan Wallace, but Wallace seems to be more of a downfield threat despite not having the speed than Rashad Bateman. Both guys have great hands. And to me, in my opinion, if you can catch the football like they can, everything else will work itself out. So they got enough guys on the roster. They have some speed. You have Duvernay, you got Prochet, you got Hollywood Brown, but you got now some guys that have great consistent hands that really help out your quarterback, gives him a wide catch radius. So Bateman is a solid receiver. And I think that's how he'll be, in Baltimore, given the opportunity.
Emory, before I let you go, let the folks know what kind of content you guys are pumping out now that the draft is done.
Well, we have our draft grades coming out probably in a week or two. We like to wait until the rookie mini camps are done, so that way we know which rookie tryout players are actually going to make the roster, because we include undrafted free agents in our draft grades because that's a part of the draft class. So keep an eye out on our YouTube channel for that, but it's never too late to get a copy of our 2021 draft guide because, again, the NFL rosters are transient. So you're going to see a ton of players, a ton of movement on these rosters, and best believe we have a scout report on it. So that's footballgameplan.com/2021 draft guide.
There he is. And F-Ball Game Plan on Twitter. Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook, is all guests he appeared on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline. I appreciate you jumping on. Great insights today.
Thanks so much, Josh. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course, Josh Hennig back here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Great analysis from Emory. I love what he's also said about McPherson. But listen, if he's versatile, you can match him up against people. You don't have to worry about whether it's outside or inside corner. That's some great points from him about McPherson. And listen, he's really high on Teron Jackson. And so, listen, if he's saying that guy is in the mold of a Brandon Graham, maybe the Eagles guys steal there in the 6th round. I still think Gainwell and Jackson can both be productive players for this team for the Eagles. We'll get to your thoughts and comments a little bit later in the hour. Of course, the text board is open at 609-403-0973. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, where you can watch the show right here on 97.3 ESPN. And of course, we are live here in the Matt Black Kia studios on 97.3 ESPN. Matt Black Kia, they will get you approved today. Matt Black Kia on the Black Horse Pike in Egg Harbor Township. Visit them online at mattblackkia.com. And Game Night being brought to you by my friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook, where you can combine player props, money lines, game lines, over-unders into one pot. So you make a small bet, an even bigger payout. It's called a same game parlay bet, and you can only find it with my friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. You can combine any odds under same game parlay tab, and you can get a bigger payout. And right now, new and existing users get up to $25 back of site credit each day your parlay falls one leg short with same game parlay insurance. You heard that right. Every day, you can get same game parlay insurance with FanDuel Sportsbook. So download the FanDuel Sportsbook app now and sign up with my promo code Hennig to get in on all the action with same game parlays and get that same game parlay insurance when you sign up with promo code Hennig at FanDuel Sportsbook. Must be 21 or to play in present NJRPA. Refund issued as non-withdrawable site credit that expires in 7 days. Max refund $25. See sportsbook.fanduel.com for details, terms, and conditions. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. We're going to head up to the center next. The state of the Flyers, the second to final Flyers home game of the year. We'll talk with our Flyers insider Kevin Durso next here on 97.3 ESPN FM. Don't forget the 97.3 ESPN mobile app with all your Phillies, Eagles, Sixers, Flyers, high school sports, and more coverage right there on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Customize your alerts right now. And of course, it's free thanks to First Bank of Sea Isle City.
It's Sixers basketball tomorrow on 97.3 ESPN with the voice of the 76ers, Tom McGinnis, calling all the exciting play-by-play action.
Embiid in the lane. Mills driving. Here's a shot by Joel off the back. Tapped in by Simmons. And it counts.
The Sixers are in Houston to face the Rockets tomorrow. Coverage begins at 8 p.m. Philadelphia 76ers basketball on your radio home of the Sixers in South Jersey. 97.3 ESPN.
When it comes to wings in the Delaware Valley, nobody beats the Piccalilli Inn. Enjoy ice-cold beer and their world-famous wings, tails, or ears on the Pick patio. Try new flavors like garlic parmesan, Jim Beam maple, or smoker. You'll see why people drive from all over for the Picks. World-famous wings and home-style favorites. Whether you're headed to or from the shore, for eat-in or take-out, make tonight the night. You visit the one, the only, the original Piccalilli Inn, Route 206, Chemung, Jersey. For live music and specials, like them on Facebook.
Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig back here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. The second to final Flyers home game of the season is tonight. Tim Saunders, Steve Coates on the call right here on 97.3 ESPN. And our man Kevin Durso is up at the center as the Flyers have one more game against the Penguins after a crazy scoring outburst last night. And as all guest Kevin Durso joins us on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Kevin, how you doing today after that crazy game last night?
I'm doing well, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing good. So before we get started, I have full confidence you will be able to answer this question. So no
okay.
But I saw this trivia last night on NHL Network, and I wanted to throw it at you. So last night was the the most goals the Flyers have scored in a game against the Penguins since 2007. Do you remember or know who the leading goal scorer was that night in 2007?
In 2007? Jeez. I mean, that would have been the 06-07 season, so that would have been the year before that really awful year the Flyers had where they finished dead last. So, I mean, I would take a guess and say that the leading scorer was probably current Penguin, Jeff Carter.
That would be incorrect.
Okay.
The leading scorer with a hat trick that night was Joffrey Lupul.
All right. That makes a lot of sense, too. For sure.
When I saw that stat last night, I knew I had to remember that for you today. So
okay.
There you go. Some useless information for your hockey night in Flyers land. Kevin, before we get to the actual game, I got to ask you about what Dave Scott said. Because, Dave Scott's up there, and we don't really hear from him very often at all. And he had some very poignant things to say. What were your major takeaways from what he said? Because he made it sound like they're not interested in, quote-unquote, blowing this team up, but they have some ideas and plans, at least in theory, that they want to do this offseason.
Well, he's not the hockey guy, and he admitted that. He's not the guy in hockey operations. I'm not really sure what to take away from it, to be honest, because first of all, he didn't meet the media per se. He was quoted in a piece in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and that's the only outlet he goes to. So instead of getting up in front of everybody and letting everybody ask questions of him and get those answers, and all the right questions were asked in that article, but he was able to kind of hide behind that a little bit, that one outlet's going to do it, could spin the story in the way that he maybe would like it to be. And I just don't buy a lot of what's in there. I really don't think you can look at this season and say, just because you're disappointed, the fans are disappointed, it's not time to do anything. I mean, I'll admit they might have a tough time doing some things this offseason. I fully buy that. It's not an easy go when you've got a lot of money tied up to to a very few amount of players, and you want to try to move them along a little bit. But I just don't know how they're going to do any significant changes unless they really get creative with some of these bigger contracts. So they really have to get creative for sure. And I wonder if he's almost trying to butter people up a little bit in terms of what happens if it is more of the same going into next year, at least the same roster. Maybe it's not the same game style. Maybe they change something up. Maybe some players come back better. Who knows? But you're playing a game of what if again, and that's happened for the last 10 years. It can't keep happening. And I don't know if he has room to hide behind it, quite honestly, because there's people who are not happy, and the people who aren't happy anyway, as I should say, is the people who are paying customers who come down to see this team. On Saturday night when the season's over, you're out of the playoffs, you're playing a team that's out of the playoffs, there was maybe 1,000 people here. That's not going to cut it, especially when you have limited capacity.
Now, Kevin, with that being said, we also saw the New York Post report this week. They're inferring that Vigneault is in trouble, and this was the same thing that happened in New York. And listen, maybe I'm just naive, but I can't blame Vigneault for what's happened to this Flyers team this year, because to me, I feel like the players at times just didn't step up, and I can't blame the head coach for everything. I feel like that's a real fallacy in hockey, just automatically blaming the head coach.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword to an extent, because you can't blame everything on the coach for sure, but at the same time, it is his job to get the players ready to play. And when you come out and you're falling behind to a team like the Devils, giving up the first goal in every game of that series, and sometimes falling behind 2-3-0 sometimes or something like that, you can't keep doing that to teams like that. It just shows you're not ready to play, and that is on the coaching staff to an extent. He hasn't been perfect this year. He knows it. I think everybody knows it. But I don't think he should be the fall guy for this type of year at all. He hasn't even had a full regular season to do anything yet. I mean, I think they got, 68, 69 games last season. It's a 56-game season this year. He hasn't even had a full season with them yet. So whatever it is, it doesn't seem like it's a coaching thing to me. I would say, because Mike Gill texted me with this too, and I kind of even said, I haven't heard anything. I heard PT saying it earlier. I haven't heard anything about AV specifically. I've heard some rumblings about don't buy the line that the coaching staff is completely safe. There are certainly some changes that could come in hindsight, like from the time that Chuck Fletcher made that comment. I think there are changes that could be on the table. But I guess I would say to you also that I wouldn't put anything off the table at this point. I think everything's on the table when you're considering where do you go, what do you do, how do you get better moving forward. So I would say that that's really where they are, is they're going to evaluate everything. And ultimately, if they feel like a change is necessary at the head coaching spot, I don't feel it's necessary, but maybe they do. Or, the other factor is if Alain Vigneault decides he doesn't feel like this is a fit anymore. He signed here and agreed to be the head coach thinking that this is an opportunity to win a Stanley Cup, to build a team. And last year it sure looked like they were heading in that direction. To turn completely the other direction kind of shows you a lot. And maybe he's wondering some things as well. So maybe that's why it's not a sure thing either. But I'd say everything's on the table.
You mentioned the possibility of changing coaches on his staff. We see that, for example, in baseball. Baseball just expired the Mets hitting coach a couple days ago. We see that in football where you fire a coordinator, bring in a new one. Is that something that happens in hockey often? Explain to folks how that would happen if the Flyers were to go that direction.
It probably doesn't happen that often it definitely doesn't happen that often mid-season, to be honest, but it does happen over time. I think that, for one, assistant coaches change a lot because guys find better opportunities. There might be a guy who goes on to become a head coach and you're left finding a replacement, but it's not very frequent. This is really kind of almost an exceptional situation because of the fact that they've got two other former NHL head coaches on the roster at the same time. So those guys could always get an offer at any time realistically, but I don't think any offers are coming. The name I've heard probably most likely out of this grouping is Mike Yeo. I just wonder, the penalty kill's been awful this year. It's no secret. Wonder if that goes a certain direction. And not only that, but you've got other, I think there could also be, I've heard rumblings of a switch with the goalie coach as well, given everything that happened in goal this year. Carter Hart's struggles, the kind of way that things were handled, or his confidence levels and things like that. I wonder if there's a change to come there as well. But that's probably the two areas I could see something happening.
Kevin Durso joining us here on Game Night. Flyers versus Pens for the final time tonight, right here on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, Tim Saunders, Steve Coates on the call. The second to final Flyers home game of the season tonight. And starting in goal, you mentioned the net is Brian Elliott, his 500th NHL start. When I say that number, what does that mean to you, Kevin?
It's pretty significant, honestly, for a goaltender to reach that mark because, especially in today's game, there's not many goaltenders out there who go out and play 60, 70 games anymore in a year. So if you're roughly going 40 games a year and reach the 500 mark in games played, it means you've been around for a long time. It means you've had success, and it means that you're doing something right for sure. You've done something to keep your name on the radar for a long time. I mean, it's the hardest position to play in the game, and it's really impressive that he gets to that milestone. I actually just tweeted right before I came on with you. The cameras during warm-up caught his wife and kids down on the glass during warm-ups with a big sign that said, "Congrats, Dad, on 500 games," which is really cool to see. So he's definitely one of the good guys on this team. It's hard not to like him. So just from the human angle, obviously, I'm sure that there's other things. When as a player, he's well past his prime. Obviously, he might be past the point of being the backup here, but we'll see. I mean, he's definitely been a good fit with Carter Hart from that sense as a mentor and does a lot of things to help him. But it's tough this year. It's just been a really tough year, and nothing's the way it normally is. So it's hard for him to even do that kind of job in a normal way to an extent and play that role. So to be in the league this long, it's especially at his position, is a huge thing.
So now this game tonight obviously has importance for the Penguins, not as much for the Flyers, but for the Penguins. So kind of lay out for the folks out there why this game is important for the Penguins and how the Flyers continue to spoil things for Pittsburgh.
Well, it became bigger last night because of the fact that when Pittsburgh lost the game the way they did, Boston won last night, and it's a logjam among those top four teams in the division. Any one of them could win the title at this point and be the top seed in the East going to the playoffs. And that really means you could play anybody at this point. So the key to success right now for any team that's left playing is winning games. And Pittsburgh especially, because they've only got 2 games left after this one. So they only have 6 more points they could get in the standings. They need this game to an extent because they just need to carve out a little bit of a lead for themselves if they want to have a shot. Because they'll fade right behind the other 3 pretty easily with the amount of games that they have left. And the opposition they're playing, and all of that type of stuff. Pittsburgh's got that in their favor, no question. I mean, they're playing the Flyers again tonight. Sure looked like a favorable matchup last night. And then you add in, they've got 2 against Buffalo coming up, so they are in good shape with the possible points they could get. But they can't have off nights like they did last night, and they were very clearly not on their game from the start. So it's an important one for them to show what they really are capable of and to kind of convince people they belong in that top spot in the East Division.
So now you mentioned the East Division. As it lays out right now, of the 4 teams we expect to make the postseason, is there a favorite in that bunch in your mind to maybe make it to the Stanley Cup Final in this weird setup this year? Or do you feel like, a team like Tampa is just going to be too much at the end of the day? Or how do you feel about the East teams as we head into the postseason next week?
Well, it's a weird dynamic to evaluate favorites because of the fact that it's all divisional play for the first 2 rounds. So it really limits, it's not the conventional way of talking about the Eastern Conference as we know it. We talked about this on the last Open Ice Hits that I was on with Broads. There's not, to me, a team that I would be shocked with coming out of the East Division, out of that grouping of 4, to be among the Final 4 in the NHL. If it was Pittsburgh, I understand why they're there. I understand why Washington's there. I understand why Boston's there, and I understand why the Islanders are there, and each one of them has strengths and probably has maybe one weakness that could do them in, but mostly they don't have weaknesses, or if they do, it's one specific area that just needs to go right for them in the playoffs. So I expect competitive hockey in that division in the playoffs. I expect long series. I expect series that are hard fought and, involve a lot of bad blood and physicality and all that type of stuff. It's going to be exciting to watch. It's certainly for somebody who's going to sit down and watch the playoffs and enjoy it and just sit back and get some good entertainment value out of it. It's going to be fun to watch.
He's Kevin Durso, our Flyers Insider for 97.3 ESPN.com, at Kevin_Durso on Twitter for all your Flyers and NHL coverage. As he mentioned, the Open Ice Hits podcast with himself and Broads, always a great listen. And as all guests, he appear on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. His pregame is up right now on 97.3 ESPN.com. Postgame will be up on the website a little bit after the game tonight. Kevin, great stuff. And I'm sure that it's almost bittersweet for you, right? The way this season is coming to an end here.
Yeah, I'll be able to say more about it next week when they play the Devils for the final time in the final game of the season. But yeah, it's getting to that point where this is the second to last time I come into the building for this season. It definitely it starts to hit you in that way. That's the second to last time you're coming in here, even if it doesn't mean much for the Flyers, and even if it's a disappointing season and kind of an underwhelming one, and a lot of things are going to happen. It's still that feeling for sure.
All right, Kevin, we'll catch you later. Take care.
All right, thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Again, Flyers versus Penguins coming up tonight. You can hear all the action right here on 97.3 ESPN. Before we get out of here, I did have a text I did want to get to that came over at 609-403-0973. Someone was listening over earlier says, are the Eagles the worst team in the division, Josh? I am optimistic because, like Mike Gill, the texter says, I say that the Eagles' healthy offensive line can be the difference maker this year. What do you think? See, I have trouble wrapping my head around the idea that the Eagles are the worst team in the division, because I feel like when I look at the worst team in the division, I factor 3 things: head coaches, trenches, quarterbacks, in that order. I don't feel like the Eagles are the worst head coach in the division. I don't feel like that the Eagles are the worst offensive line. And I certainly don't think the Eagles are the worst quarterback. I think the worst quarterback in the division is Daniel Jones. I think the worst offensive line is probably the Giants as well. And probably the worst head coach is Mike McCarthy, because that guy rode Aaron Rodgers' coattails to a Super Bowl championship. So I can't put the Eagles as the worst team in the division. I think I would right now have to say that they are a hair ahead of the Giants for a variety of reasons, but that could change in a couple months. I'm Josh Hennig. This is Game Night. I'll catch you tomorrow.
Health Update with Robin Stoloff. Learn more, live better.
Cyber threats are on the rise. Are you at risk? These threats include malware that can take your passwords, allowing your information to be hacked, ransomware that forces you to pay to retrieve your locked information, or phishing attempts to steal your identity. Many of these scams exploit people's good nature. For instance, a scammer might make a positive comment on your social media